Welcome to the NPACE Radio 2012 Presidential Election Student Faculty Roundtable, where Columbus State University's students and faculty discuss the candidates' positions on current issues. We are broadcasting and streaming on WRCG AM 1420 News in Columbus, Georgia. Thanks for joining us, and without further ado, here's our faculty moderator, Dr. Chris McCullough. Dr. McCullough?
Thank you, Maggie. I'd like to welcome our three student panelists from the Communication Department, Mr. Denzel Curry, Mrs. Christina Kleehammer, and Mr. Jeremy Statham. Tonight we're going to talk about a few of the key issues that have come up, both domestic and foreign, and I'll wrap up with a little bit of analysis. To open the panel tonight, Mr. Curry, I'd like to talk a little bit about the economy. We have a situation where both candidates are taking two perspectives here. For Governor Romney, there's a sense that all of our economic stagnation and frustration over the past 4 years have been a direct result of the Obama administration and its policies, whereas President Obama has put a standard out there that he's working with a very large problem that he's inherited. Can you comment a little bit about this and your perspective as someone who's established a bit of a reputation as a student entrepreneur?
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Dr. McCullough, for having me on. As I've mentioned to you before, when in 2007, I got my real estate license, and I became a realtor right around the economic downturn. And personally, as a young entrepreneur, it had great effects on the decisions I made as an entrepreneur throughout the next couple of years. And when we speak about President Obama and his policies economically, we have to keep in mind that the bubble burst, that things did turn south right before he was able to have a chance at being president. He came into a system that was perpetuated years before, and initially these things sort of fell out of whack. But I don't think that the burden is his to hold. Yes, he needed to prove throughout these 4 years that he was able to keep us going in the right direction, moving up. But I don't think that he holds the entire situation to blame for what has happened and what continues to happen today.
Christina, can you speak a little bit from your perspective?
Well, I think that Denzel is absolutely right. I think, the economy did collapse right before President Obama's first election, and he did inherit a huge mess as a result of the failures of previous administrations. But at the same time, it is the job that he signed up for, and we hired him to fix it. So did he do his job? Well, since we are in the academic world, I would say that I would give him a B, because he didn't fail us. He did do something, but at the same time, he didn't wow us either.
Jeremy?
I believe that this is one of the hardest questions we have to answer in America today. And if we had the answer, it would already be fixed. President Obama came into office in a time that was tumultuous, in a time that the economy was already failing and already going into a downturn. He's dealing with the economic policy decisions of three presidents prior to him, from Reagan to Clinton to President Bush, and all of the good things and bad things that they did, all of the mistakes and correct decisions that they made in policy during their terms, he has to deal with. The policy decisions that he wants to make, they have to be able to work with the policy decisions that have already been made, whether or not they're good ones.
Thank you, Jeremy. Dovetailing off the topic of the economy, let's talk a little bit about each candidate's idea for tax reform. Jeremy, I want to take this with you as a front position. We've had a lot of talk of the 99% and the 1% when it comes to tax policy. And when it comes to the difference, and the key difference is that socioeconomic breakdown where President Obama wants to put a little more of the onus in terms of tax policy for government programs on folks who make more than $250,000 a year, whereas Governor Romney wants to bring cuts across the board, putting a select emphasis on that higher economic status in the hopes that it'll generate a greater potential economic turnaround for more jobs, greater salary options, increasing opportunities for middle income and lower income citizens. What's your take on the policy differences, and what do you think really is going to work here?
The fact of the matter is, tax cuts sound nice. and they always have, and they always will sound nice to the average person. But are they the best thing all across the board, or on just the top, or just the bottom? The fact of the matter is, if you look at just Romney's perspective, it is trickle-down economics, and it is the same theory that can be traced back to the 1890s when with horse and sparrow theory it was translated into, if you can feed the horse enough oats, some will pass through to the road for the sparrows. It has been proven wrong over and over again, and it is still wrong today, and it's not going to work. I believe that if you were talking about the upper echelon of the tax bracket, these are not necessarily just individuals with income, but also corporations. If you consider corporations an entity in the first place, we're dealing with a different echelon of income. And if you make that kind of money and deal with that kind of income, I believe you should have more responsibility.
Understood. Christina, your perspective.
I recognize that there is a lot of difficulty in this, that President Obama is asking the upper class to pick up slack so that we can afford larger government programs that most of them would prefer to keep small and even do without. Okay, so I think that if we could kind of cut and paste their two approaches to this tax issue and go with Obama's wanting to have the upper class pick up a lot of the slack, but also go for a smaller budget for the government, we'd be in a really good position to recover and move forward and take care of some of our debt. But I think that both approaches have strengths and weaknesses to the issue. I'm in favor of taxing the wealthy, but at the same time, I am in favor of a smaller budget, and I just can't have what I want all the way with either candidate.
Fair point. Denzel.
Now, I'm gonna take probably some pointers from Jeremy and looking back at the past. And if we look at the SNL, or at least if we look at the tax reform in the 80s as a response to the SNL crisis, we see that taxes were cut from, 50% to 28%. And yeah, it stimulated the economy. It was a big stimulus push. Jobs were created. But we see now that we're dealing with some of the things, some of the consequences for such tax breaks back then. Yeah, if we were to cut taxes today, like Jeremy said, it would look good. It would feel good. I mean, me personally, I wouldn't mind having an extra 10% cut off my taxes. But looking ahead, and that's what we want to do. We want to look forward. We can't just stay in today. So looking ahead, I'm not so sure if we would be making the right decision. Now, when we talk about Romney's plan, right? Now, Romney takes a page out of, I think most businessmen take a page from Robert Kiyosaki with the cash flow quadrant, in which you look at the emphasis on business owners and investors, in which you want to give them some tax loops because what they say is that they create businesses, they create the jobs, but we want to sort of reel that in a little bit. I mean, we can't just put an emphasis on. I think what a great move is the Buffett rule that's being projected by by President Obama's campaign, in which I think many people in that 1% would do good to personally take on that burden that we have. Because, I mean, it's something that affects not just the middle class, it affects everyone. And if you're American across the board, rather you're in that 1% and that 99% taking on some of that burden is responsible.
Well, moving on from economic and tax policy, we have a really interesting development in the campaign, I believe, in that we're talking a lot more about women's issues than probably President Obama or Governor Romney really wanted to get into. Whether we're talking about equal pay rights, whether we're talking about rights to make their own healthcare choices, women have taken a center stage in a large part with different voting blocks. And given Christina's unique position as our female panelist today, I wanted her to open up a little bit with her thoughts on what she's seen from both candidates.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. McCullough. President Obama, he has a wife and two bright, beautiful daughters. And so when he says that he cares about women's issues, I genuinely believe him. I think he really, really does. But I also believe that in President Obama's eagerness, he has taken a huge misstep in his advocacy for women's rights, because I believe that the freedom for one demographic of people should not be at the expense of the freedom for another demographic. And of course, we all belong to more than one demographic of people. And personally, in addition to being an American woman, I am also Catholic. And I desire the freedom to be both, and I want to feel that both aspects of my identity are equally supported and protected by my government. At this point, President Obama has enforced a policy called the HHS mandate, which basically obligates religious institutions to support methods of medical treatment that are in direct opposition of our beliefs. And our attempts to ask him to reconsider have not been very successful. And he's doing all of this in the name of women's health. But as a woman, I would say to our president that I am sincerely grateful for his concern for our well-being, but that I have a very different definition of what women's health is. And I'm concerned that he doesn't recognize that so many American women do choose to be part of these religions. And for those of us that do, no man is forcing values upon us except for right now the president himself with the HHS mandate. And so this is where Romney will get a lot of his support, honestly, because for millions of Americans, including women, there's nothing on the table up for discussion right now that is more important than this issue. And if anything, they know that Romney will protect their freedom of religion and work to undo the HHS mandate.
Jeremy?
Personally, I applaud President Obama when it comes to this issue. When you're talking about President Obama's commitment to women's rights, you have to look at his views on equal rights in general. Equal pay for women in the workforce, allowing same-sex marriages, standing up for the LGBT community, repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, jobs and education for people with disabilities. He wants equal rights for everyone, not just one specific demographic. When you're looking at Governor Romney, he's made it clear that he opposes abortion, wants to overturn Roe versus Wade, supports the Blunt Act, and that he would allow employers to deny insurance coverage based on moral convictions, wants to abolish Planned Parenthood, and has stated that the result of Griswold versus Connecticut was wrong, which means he thinks states should have the right to ban contraception. Having the office of president does not mean you have the position of being America's pastor, and Romney wants to make policy decisions that directly derive from his personal moral and religious convictions. That is something I disagree with.
Understood. Denzel?
Now, I'm inclined when it comes to women's rights to agree with President Obama's take on it, especially champion the Lilly Ledbetter Act. And also healthcare wise, I think the big push here is that a woman should have the choice of what to do with her body. Politicians nor the government should have the choice to say what she can and cannot do. Governor Romney has championed a stake that says that birth begins at conception, which makes certain kinds of contraceptives illegal. But to stay outside of the religious point of view, I think that just having a choice is more beneficial for women than not.
We're going to wrap up for the first segment here on domestic policy, and we're going to move back to focusing on foreign relations. When we come back from the break, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie.
You're listening to the NPACE Radio 2012 Presidential Election Student Faculty Roundtable from the NPACE Center at Columbus State University. We are broadcasting and streaming online on WRCG News in Columbus, Georgia. On the other side of the break, we will discuss Veterans Affairs as well as many other topics. Stay tuned. We'll be back in 5. Welcome back to the NPACE Radio 2012 Presidential Election Student Faculty Roundtable, where Columbus State University students and faculty discuss the candidates' positions on current issues. We are broadcasting and streaming on WRCG AM 1420 News in Columbus, Georgia. Thanks for joining us. Without further ado, here's our faculty moderator, Dr. Chris McCullough. Dr. McCullough.
Thank you, Maggie. We're changing focus now from some domestic issues over to foreign policy. And to begin with, I wanted to talk with each of our panelists about the interesting situation we have where this is really our first campaign in a while where we don't actually have a standing commander-in-chief or challenger with military experience, which for some is a major concern. I wanted to begin with Jeremy talking a little bit about how that impacts that relationship and how you think, well, how President Obama's handled it and how Governor Romney might handle it differently.
In this particular perspective, it is one area that I was worried when Obama got elected. I was worried because he had never had any military service, and I didn't know how that would play out considering the strife in the Middle East that we have been in for so long now. But I believe he has proven himself. You know, a lot of people say, well, in regards to the killing of Osama bin Laden, a lot of people say, well, you know, Obama took credit for that, and he did that on the shoulders of other people's work. But the fact of the matter is, he is our president, and through the efforts of the military and the efforts of Obama's policies, they found him and they got him. That was the goal of 9/11, from what I think. That was find the bad guys, get them, and we did that. President Obama has deferred to the people that have the experience, and he has asked them for help in areas that he does not know himself. And that is something that I believe is indicative of a true leader, someone that is willing to ask for the help that they need.
Okay. Christina?
Well, the presidency is a civilian job, and so while there are strengths that serving in the military can add to the president's perspective, I don't think it's necessary to get the job done by any means, and I think that President Obama has showed us that, actually. I think what is necessary for the presidency is to understand foreign policy and foreign relations, and that's what we're really looking for. So he has to understand foreign policy and surround himself with staff and advisors who do have that military experience, like Jeremy just said, and can help contribute to the commander-in-chief's decisions.
Denzel?
Now, I completely agree with Christina. As president, one of your jobs is commander-in-chief, and national security is a big part of that portfolio. I've sort of reconciled this in my own head the same way as I did in 2008. McCain had the military experience. Obama was the newbie. And this year, not so much as the military experience, neither one of them has it, but Obama has foreign policy experience now, which Governor Mitt Romney does not. And we can see that foreign policy is a big thing. You can look at Herman Cain. He fell as a Republican candidate because he was not as knowledgeable in foreign policy as we would like to see a candidate for the president of the United States be. And Obama, and in agreement with Jeremy, President Obama has linked his interventions were led by special forces and intelligence rather than just ground troops. So he has leaned on the things that has made him successful in the past. And I think going further, he's just learned some lessons that will help strengthen him in the next term.
Okay. Thank you, Denzel. Change in focus, thinking about something that's been a bit of entertainment for some of the casual observers and sort of a discussion point of the pundits, is really where our defense budget's going from here. I think we see a situation where both candidates are increasing it, but we're seeing allocations in different areas. What I'd really like to go over with each of you is sort of how you see the situation and what you think our best use of those resources really would be. And to begin, I'm going to open with Christina and work my way around.
When it comes to national security and our foreign policy, there is information that a president is privileged to that a candidate is not privileged to yet. And I think that there's a reason why in Obama's first campaign, he said he would do several things. Then when he got into the office, he said, actually, I see now why that's not possible to do it the way that I originally wanted to, because he has information that right now Governor Romney doesn't quite have. And so honestly, when it comes to the needs of our military, I don't think that what a candidate says matters as much as what will actually happen when he gets there and has all of the information. And so right now, President Obama, he does have that information. He sees what he's looking at. And I think that there have been a lot of military budget cuts that have happened over the past year or so that have already made what's already a difficult lifestyle just that much harder. And so, of course, as a military wife, I am all for breathing room in the military budget personally. But at the same time, we're all making sacrifices to help the economy recover. And I just think that the military budget cuts that have been made so far are straining enough on military families, and I don't want Obama to push it further for us. Because, like I said, it is already a difficult lifestyle, and our soldiers already don't get paid a whole lot, and we do need those incentives to make it work.
Thank you, Christina. Denzel?
Now, I want to agree with Christina, especially considering the fact that this is a touchy subject to touch on, because as much as we don't want to affect some of the families that are in the military, we also know that we're in a hole and we need to revamp some of the places that our money is going. And just like Christina said, that the president is inclined to more options or more knowledge than his competitors. This sort of reminds me of the Bush and Clinton race in '92, in which Clinton felt a certain way about the acts that were going on in China, the butchers of Berlin. But once he got in office, he sort of figured out that, things happen a little different behind that Oval Office. But I think that I couldn't say one way or another where our budget cuts should go, but I do think we need to tread softly. We go into defense budgets because we want to remain a strong military presence, but we also need to reallocate some of these funds.
Jeremy?
I'm a strong supporter of the military. I fully support all our boys overseas, but as cliched of an argument as this may sound, we have enough problems at home right now. We have an economic crisis that is paramount in everyone's mind, and everyone is worried about how they're going to eat tomorrow here at home, here in America. And while I understand that there is a global community in the world now, and we have to be a part of it, we have to understand that we need to take care of the problems that we have here. Demilitarization is something that, to a certain extent, I believe is a viable option. It's something that we should be looking at. We are shaking our big American stick in a lot of countries that don't want us there in the first place. If you look at Governor Romney's viewpoint, honestly, the way I look at it is he wants bigger guns, bigger bullets, bigger explosions, and a bigger military. And I don't want somebody running our country that views foreign policy like a Michael Bay movie.
Okay, Jeremy. Before we leave the topic, since we are talking defense budget, I wanted to open the door to think about what we're doing for our veterans when they come back. A major issue that's really starting to get some attention, frankly, I think a little late in the campaign, is what do we do for the folks that have been overseas for us for the past 10, 12 years? We've got a fresh crop of young adults trying to re-enter society. For me, I wanted to start with Christina and get her take on some of the things we could potentially do differently in terms of veterans affairs, in terms of reacclimation, reconnecting with the workforce, those sort of matters. So, Christina?
I can't find my notes on this, so I'm just going to fly on this one. But this is actually a pretty easy one for me. Here in Columbus, it's not uncommon to see homeless veterans on the streets, and this should never be the case. There are plenty of people who are receiving assistance from the government who have never served their country before, and so I think that there is a lot that can be done for them to make sure that they stay off the streets, that when they return to civilian lifestyle, that they're having help reacclimating. And not only that, but speaking from experience, I know that while soldiers are in the military, they and their families are taken care of. And when they retire, they're taken care of in a way. If a soldier loses his life in doing his job, his family is taken care of. But if a soldier is injured, if he's wounded on the battlefield, then if that prevents him from doing his job and he can no longer serve in the military, then he is not helped as much as he should be, or her, of course, obviously, she. So, I think that there can be a lot more done to help wounded soldiers once they return to civilian life as well. I think that programs like Wounded Warrior Project are great charities that help. I think that, the government should do their part as well to pick up some of this and help wounded soldiers reacclimate.
Denzel?
Now, I don't have any personal ties to the military, but looking out in our streets and looking out in our cities, I do think that the DOD and the VA does need to do a better job in seamlessly transitioning these men and women back into civilian life. Especially these are men and women that are facing death every day on a daily basis for our sake. And I think the fact that we let veterans go homeless and go hungry is a disrespect to our military, a disrespect to us as Americans. So I'm not real big on veteran policy, what has worked, what hasn't worked. But I think that whatever we do from now on, we should not see these type of things, especially in this bigger number, for people who sacrifice their lives and their sanity on our behalf.
And Jeremy?
I would like to first agree with Christina. The Wounded Warrior Project is something that is very good. It's a great nonprofit and a great organization that is helping soldiers across the nation. But I would like to point out that as far as government programs are concerned, on August 31st of this year, President Obama signed an executive order that increases veterans' access to mental health care, increases efforts to prevent suicide in the veteran community, and significantly cuts through the bureaucratic red tape that has been notorious when dealing with the VA. The problems aren't all fixed yet, but President Obama has taken a very definite step in the right direction in this issue.
Thank you, folks. One, very quickly to wrap up, I want a one-sentence perspective from each of you. It's been 12 years since we declared a war on terror. What do you guys take on the current situation? Christina, if you'd like to start.
One sentence?
Yes.
I believe that President Obama wanted to end it. I believe he still does. And I believe that if he can't right now, then we need to trust that.
Jeremy?
I believe the war on terror is wrong in concept. It is something that we'll never be able to defeat. It's a concept that we can't defeat tangibly.
Understood. And Denzel?
And I think President Obama's template for conveying American power is vastly different and superior to the Bush's campaign because it's not focusing on terror as a whole, but focusing on particular terrorists. And I think that's what's needed moving forward.
I agree with that.
Thank you, students. I appreciate your input. We're going to put a wrap on this segment, and then I'm going to close with some final thoughts and some analysis. Once again, thank you to our student panelists, Denzel Curry, Christina Kleehammer, and Jeremy Staten.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough.
Over to you, Maggie.
You are tuned in to the NPACE Radio 2012 Presidential Election Student Faculty Roundtable from the NPACE Center at Columbus State University. We are broadcasting and streaming online on WRCG News in Columbus, Georgia. On the other side of the break, we'll hear from Dr. McCullough. Stay tuned. We'll be back in 5. Welcome back to the final section of the NPACE Radio 2012 Presidential Election Student Faculty Roundtable, where Columbus State University students and faculty discuss the candidates' positions on current issues. We are broadcasting and streaming on WRCG AM 1420 News in Columbus, Georgia. Thanks for joining us, and without further ado, here's our faculty moderator, Dr. Chris McCullough, with his final thoughts. Dr. McCullough?
Thank you, Maggie. Well, looking back on our discussion, I have some thoughts about that and the campaign in general this time around. To begin with, we can focus on the horse race elements, if you're in it like it's a sporting event or anything else that we hear in the mainstream. Bottom line, it comes down to the battleground states these past really the final 2 days. If you're looking for indicators of how it's going to turn out, look to places like Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Iowa. This will tell you a lot about how the final push has been It'll tell you how things are working. You're going to hear a lot about polling results, where the candidates are spending their last few hours the past couple of days. In truth, most of the persuasion's over with. Now it's about mobilization. You're going to see a lot about candidates getting their volunteers out to go out and knock on doors and go door to door, get people mobilized to vote, set up busing from polling stations. This whole process is really now down to procedure and what the final result is. But I do have some ideas for things you can follow to get an idea of how things are going to turn out over the next couple of days. A couple of blogs that are worth looking at. First of all, you have Real Clear Politics. You also have 538, which is a blog moderated on the New York Times. They both give you a pretty good idea of the Electoral College, some of the polling results, some of the events that are going on that you can follow if you're really into it for the outcomes. But moving past the horse race, because frankly, I think it's less substantive than what we could really be talking about, I just wanted to touch on a few points that we heard from our panelists today. First of all, they did an excellent job, I thought. A week of preparation for some college students to come in here and share their points of view was very impressive. First of all, on the domestic side of things, if we think about the economic situation where we are, I'm not 100% sold it's one person's responsibility. I tend to agree with my panelists that it is something that's developed over time. We do see a 10 to 20 year shift that leads to a lot of economic outcomes. Something that I've been frustrated by in this campaign, and I think something we really need to focus on, is the push to make it about class warfare. That's not how we fix problems in this country, unfortunately. This is a tactic we've seen in both campaigns. Frankly, you need to sit down at the table, compromise, and discuss things rather than get to that level. As far as women's rights, frankly, women have had the right to vote for less than a century. We're long overdue in dealing with issues like equal pay for work and other matters. As far as the perspective on who's right or wrong in terms of making health choices, I think we have to allow them to make the choice, and I think we do have to respect their personal freedoms in the process. I think there's room for both in the way we set up our policies. You don't necessarily have to force someone's hand to effectively succeed in getting a policy in place that respects their civil rights. As far as veterans affairs, thinking about the foreign element from a domestic standpoint, I think we have to really make free isn't free an understood standpoint for citizens in terms of what we provide to our veterans. It's really a public tragedy that we have so many folks coming home to a lower quality of life. As far as foreign policy goes, I think we're over-exaggerating the perspective that a lack of military experience means an incapability to lead. I think we see a president in office right now who's learned to defer rather impressively to his Joint Chiefs of Staff at times and to respect their experience and their knowledge on issues. I think Governor Romney, given the opportunity, may find a similar level of success in his approach. I think being a prudent delegator is just as important as being a former general in some ways. Frankly, I think when it comes to the war on terror, it's a reality we now exist in. Whether we agree with the fact that it's a concept we can ever win or not win, I think it's a part of what we have to think about as domestic defense. As far as foreign policy is an issue in this campaign, we've seen both candidates not really differentiate on their standpoints. And I think part of that, and a big part of that, is the fact that they don't really want to talk about foreign policy. They'd much rather make the narrative about the economy from one perspective or the other. So as far as major differences in the campaign we've noticed, you're going to find very easily that there's a fundamental difference between 2008 and this year. We're no longer dealing in the narrative of change for change's sake or the fundamental difference or making a concerted effort to really change regime here. What we have is a campaign derived on attacks, checking a standing candidate's record, apologies for things that didn't quite come through, and depending on the issue, you either have backtracks, flip-flops, or double downs on your stance. depending on if you're trying to invigorate your base or cater to a block of voters you really need. I think we're seeing a bigger return to cynicism from voters because this narrative's in place as opposed to the one we saw last time. It's easy to be optimistic when you talk about change and being fundamentally different from anyone before you. So, thinking about it from a macro point, I think that change in narrative may impact the one thing that really came out of that 2008 election, which was a very strong youth vote. And the fact that that was a major reversal on 40 years of trends of decline. And I think you had the right candidate, you had the right approach to conduits, whether it's social media or other forms of campaigning. And I also think the confluence of events, an unpopular standing president, other matters really came together to bring an environment where the 18 to 40 demographic really re-engaged in the campaign process. Now, I think there's room for the debate point that how our youth define civic engagement is fundamentally different from the way it was in the 60s and 70s. A lot of them think community volunteerism and participation on that front really are more proactive and productive forms of engagement in their environment. And I applaud them for that because it is a very proactive and productive way of engaging. But I'd also remind them of the fact that in that level of engagement, they need to allow for the possibility that, frankly, their vote matters too. I recently heard the viewpoint of a very engaging 25-year-old named Matthew Siegel, who formed the organization ourtime.com, which is a political efficacy group for voters from the 18 to 30 demographic. And he made a very striking point that either you help write the menu through your votes, through your engagement, through your volunteerism, or you're on the menu. And he really related the subject to the California state legislature and how over the last 10 years, they have continually and consistently cut the public education budget for universities. And when asked about it directly, the legislators made the point, well, they don't vote, so what do we have to worry about? They're not going to throw us out of office. So whether you agree with President Obama as a candidate, whether you like Governor Romney, when it comes to the local issues, when it comes to state politicians, when it comes to state bond initiatives, ballot referendums, all of these issues, engage. Make it part of your volunteerism and your engagement. Because frankly, I think Mr. Siegel was onto something with his point that if you're not helping write the menu, you're on it. Because if you're not part of that established constituency, you're on the cutting room floor. As far as our two candidates and their campaign, frankly, in case you haven't noticed, we haven't really had a substantive conversation about policy or issues from either man. And frankly, I'm always frustrated by that, but that's pretty standard for civic discourse when it comes to a presidential campaign. I think it's got a lot to do with why we're so cynical as a society when it comes to elections, why we're seeing the drop-off in voting we've seen. A lot of 51-49 politics are really killing us as a society. We wedge rather than come together. And frankly, we don't really have two candidates with separate, distinct, and meaningful policy differences. We have two that fundamentally act about the same, talk about the same, but they get divisive on 4 or 5 issues. So it's really two sides of the same coin politically. So it's easy to understand why people get down on it. As far as the culprits we see out there, campaign specialists that create this wedge issue situation where it's women's health, or it's tax policy, or it's the economy, or it's your war record, or it's other silly issues that come up. We've had a lot of really wonderful social mediated issues lately from debate gaffes. The idea of binders full of women, horses and bayonets, other factors that aren't really about the substantive policy issues. They're kind of tangential to it, but they don't really bring us into a connective issue of talking about improving things. Journalists, as the economy has soured in journalism, so has the quality of content and news coverage. We go with what gets a crowd, and frankly, in journalism, it's appealing to the competitive angle, the horse race, the numbers. I mean, I even opened this segment with 2 to 3 minutes about it. Whoever's the first to 270 wins the office. And that's kind of what we've come down to focusing on in that avenue. And I don't believe that's what folks like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson had in mind. when it came to journalism. And frankly, I think each of us on our own have sort of become culprits in this process, because not all of us are engaging at the level we should. We're not reading up on this subject. I'm excited about panels like this because it gives me an opportunity to get 3 young adults to actually sit down and look over things for a while. And I think for each of us as potential voters, it's important to become informed consumers about that the same way we do about shopping. Diversify your news content. Don't stick to one specific avenue that totally is in line with your ideology. We've seen the partisan press come back when it comes to Fox News, MSNBC, even CNN at times plays to both angles. But don't be afraid to dig into really informative blogs. Don't be afraid to get into commentary sites. Don't be afraid to dig in on candidate records. And before you go in to vote, drop by the Secretary of State website and read up about those ballot initiatives and referendums that you're going to have to vote on. Because frankly, you need to know what they're about. You need to do a little homework on them. And don't just fall into the jargon that they've written at the legislative level for you to vote on. Figure out what it really means to you concretely. And really, please participate in this process. I'm not going to give you the old cliched, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain, or any of those other standard chestnuts we hear. The bottom line is there's a lot that's going to affect you locally on that ballot that has nothing to do with President Obama or Governor Romney. I'd really just like you to at least walk in and take care of the local initiatives and the candidates who directly affect you, if nothing else. I don't care if you write in your dog for president. But if you can make an informed choice between the 2 candidates, please do. But don't pass on one of those constitutionally granted rights we actually have in this country. And finally, just a thought in terms of the election process. The beautiful thing about when this is all over sometime in the wee hours tomorrow night is we will not have had a coup. We will not have had a revolution. And that's one thing that makes this place great compared to others. We can do this civilly. So I invite you guys to get out there, to participate. And before you do, read up a little bit. As for our session today, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us this hour. I'd like to thank once again our panelists, Denzel Curry, Christina Kleehammer, and Jeremy Statham, as well as our production with Maggie Reese. Finally, thank you to the Department of Communication and the NPACE Center for hosting this event. We hope you guys will consider following our programs in the future. Over to you, Maggie.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. You've been listening to the NPACE Radio 2012 Presidential Election Student Faculty Roundtable from the NPACE Center at Columbus State University. We are broadcasting and streaming online at WRCG News in Columbus, Georgia. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.